back to the committee and extend a special welcome to the new members joining us. On the Republican side, we're joined by Senator Perdue and Senator Sass. On the Democrat side, we are joined by Senator Warren and Senator Peters. It's a special privilege to serve on this committee, most of all because it affords us the opportunity to spend so much time in the company of heroes, the men and women who serve and sacrifice on our behalf every day. I hope you will come to cherish your service on this committee as much as I have over the years, and I look forward to working with each of you. The committee meets this morning for the first in a series of hearings on cybersecurity to receive the testimony on foreign cyber threats to the United States. I'd like to welcome our witnesses this morning, James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, Marcel Luttrell, Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and Admiral Mike Rogers, Commander of U.S. Cyber Command, Director of the National Security Agency, and Chief of the Central Security Service. This hearing is about the range of cybersecurity challenges confronting our nation. Threats from countries like Russia, China, and North Korea and Iran, as well as non-state actors from terrorist groups to transnational criminal organizations. In recent years, we've seen a growing series of cyber attacks by multiple actors, attacks that have targeted our citizens, businesses, military, and government. But there's no escaping the fact that this committee meets today for the first time in this new Congress in the aftermath of an unprecedented attack on our democracy. At the President's direction, Director Clapper is leading a comprehensive review of Russian interference in our recent election with the goal of informing the American people as much as possible about what happened. I am confident that Director Clapper will conduct this review with the same integrity and professionalism that has characterized his nearly half a century of government and military service. I'm equally confident in the dedicated members of our intelligence community. The goal of this review, as I understand it, is not to question the outcome of the presidential election, nor should it be. As both President Obama and President-elect Trump have said, our nation must move forward, but we must do so with full knowledge of the fact. I trust Director Clapper will brief the Congress on his review when it is completed. This is not the time or place to preview its findings. That said, we know a lot already. In October, our intelligence agencies concluded unanimously that, quote, the Russian government directed compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. They also assessed that, quote, disclosures of alleged hacked emails were consistent with the methods and motivations of Russian-directed efforts, and that these thefts and disclosures were intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Since then, our intelligence community has released additional information concerning these Russian activities, including a joint analysis report that provided technical details regarding the tools and infrastructure used by the Russian civilian and military intelligence services to attack the United States. Every American should be alarmed by Russia's attacks on our nation. There is no national security interest more vital to the United States of America than the ability to hold free and fair elections without foreign interference. That's why Congress must set partisanship aside, follow the facts, and work together to devise comprehensive solutions to deter, defend against, and when necessary, respond to foreign cyber attacks. As we do, we must recognize that the recent Russian attacks are one part of a much bigger cyber problem. Russian cyber attacks have targeted the White House, the Joint Staff, the State Department, our critical infrastructure. Chinese cyber attacks have reportedly targeted NSA, the Department of State and Commerce, congressional offices, military labs, the Naval War College, and U.S. businesses, including major defense contractors. Most recently, China compromised over 20 million background investigations at the Office of Personnel Management. Iran has used cyber tools in recent years to attack the U.S. Navy, U.S. partners in the Middle East, major financial institutions, and a dam just 25 miles north of New York City. And, of course, North Korea was responsible for the massive cyber attack on Sony Pictures in 2014. What seems clear is that our adversaries have reached a common conclusion that the reward for attacking America in cyberspace outweighs the risk. For years, cyber attacks on our nation have been met with indecision and inaction. Our nation has no policy and thus no strategy for cyber deterrence. This appearance of weakness has been provocative to our adversaries who have attacked us again and again with growing severity. Unless we demonstrate that the costs of attacking the United States outweigh the perceived benefits, these cyber attacks will only grow. This is also true beyond the cyber domain. It should not surprise us that Vladimir Putin would think he could launch increasingly severe cyber attacks against our nation when he had paid little price for invading Ukraine, annexing Crimea, subverting democratic values and institutions across Europe, and, of course, helping Bashar Assad slaughter civilians in Syria for more than a year with impunity. The same is true for China, Iran, North Korea, and any other adversary that has recently felt emboldened to challenge the world order. Put simply, we cannot achieve cyber deterrence without restoring the credibility of U.S. deterrence more broadly. To do so, we must first have a policy, which means finally resolving the long list of basic cyber questions that we as a nation have yet to answer. What constitutes an act of war or aggression in cyberspace that would merit a military response, be it by cyber or other means? What is our theory of cyber deterrence, and what is our strategy to implement it? Is our government organized appropriately to handle this threat, or are we so stovepiped that we cannot deal with it effectively? Who is accountable for this problem, and do they have sufficient authorities to deliver results? Are we in the Congress just as stovepiped on cyber as the executive branch, such that our oversight actually reinforces problems rather than helping to resolve them? Do we need to change how we are organized? This committee intends to hold a series of hearings in the months ahead to explore these and other questions, and we look forward to hearing the candid views of our distinguished witnesses today who have thought about and worked on these questions as much as anyone in our nation. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you for your leadership in promptly scheduling this hearing on foreign cyber threats. I'd also like to welcome our witnesses, Director Clapper, Undersecretary Lettra, and Admiral Rogers. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service and your dedication. While I understand that our witnesses will be discussing the cyber threats that many countries, including China and India, pose to our nation, I would like to focus for a few minutes on the widely reported instances of Russian hacking and disinformation that raised concerns regarding the election of 2016. In addition to stealing information from the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign and cherry-picking what information it leaked to the media, the Russian government also created and spread fake news and conspiracies across the vast social media landscape. At the very least, the effect of Russia's actions was to erode the faith of the American people in our democratic institutions. These and other cyber tools remain highly active and engaged in misinforming our political dialogue even today. There is still much we do not know, but Russia's involvement in these intrusions does not appear to be in any doubt. Russia's best cyber operators are judged to be as elusive and hard to identify as any in the world. In this case, however, detection and attribution were not so difficult, the implication being that Putin may have wanted us to know what he had done, seeking only a level of plausible deniability to support an official rejection of culpability. These Russian cyber attacks should be judged within the larger context of Russia's rejection of the post-Cold War international order and aggressive actions against its neighbors. Russia's current leaders, and President Putin in particular, perceived the democratic movements in the former Soviet states, the West's general support for human rights, press freedoms, the rule of law, and democracy, as well as NATO and EU enlargement, as a threat to what they believe is Russia's sphere of influence. Putin's Russia makes no secret of the fact that it is determined to aggressively halt and counter what it characterizes as Western encroachment on its vital interests. The invasion of Georgia, the annexation of Crimea, the aggression against Ukraine, featuring sophisticated hybrid warfare techniques, the continuing military buildup despite a declining economy, saber-rattling in the Baltics and Baltic Sea, the authoritarian onslaught against the press, NGOs, and what remains of the Russian democratic opposition, the unwavering campaign for national sovereignty over the Internet, and the creation of an iron information curtain like China's Great Firewall and its aggressive interference in Western political processes all are one piece. Russia's efforts to undermine democracy at home and abroad and destabilize the countries on its border cannot be ignored or traded away in exchange for the appearance of comity. Furthermore, what Russia did to the United States in 2016, it has done, and continues to do in Europe. This challenge to the progress of democratic values since the end of the Cold War must not be tolerated. Despite the indifference of some to this matter, our nation needs to know in detail what the intelligence community has concluded was an assault by senior officials of a foreign government on our electoral process. Our electoral process is the bedrock of our system of government. An effort to manipulate it, especially by a regime with values and interests so antithetical to our own, is a challenge to the nation's security which must be met with bipartisan and universal condemnation, consequences, and correction. I believe the most appropriate means to conduct an inquiry is the creation of a special select committee in the Senate, since this issue and the solutions to the problems it has exposed spill across the jurisdictional divides of the standing committees on armed services, intelligence, foreign relations, homeland security, and judiciary. Failing that, our committee must take on as much of this task as we can, and I again commend the Chairman for his commitment to do so. Therefore, I am pleased and grateful that his efforts will be expended, the energy will be invested on the matters that are so critical to the American people. I also want to applaud President Obama's initial steps publicized last week to respond to Russia's hostile actions. General Clapper, Undersecretary Letcher, Admiral Rogers, we appreciate your urgent efforts to discover what happened and why, and to make these facts known to the President-elect, Congress, and the American people. Although your investigation and report to President Obama is not yet public, we hope you'll be able to convey and explain what's been accomplished so far, including the steps already announced by the President. In addition, I am sure we will have many questions about how we are organized in the cyber domain and what changes you have recommended going forward, subjects that President Obama referenced in his signing statement of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2017. These are difficult issues, but they are of vital importance to our nation, our security, and our democracy. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you in a bipartisan manner to conduct a thorough and thoughtful inquiry and to do more to address the cyber threats our nation faces more broadly by state and non-state actors. Thank you very much.
Welcome the witnesses, and Ms. Secretary, we'll begin with you for any opening statements or comments you might have.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I will shortly turn the microphone over to Director Clapper for some comments, followed by Admiral Rogers. As this is my last appearance before this committee, before stepping down from 8 years of Pentagon service in a few weeks,
I'm sure you'll regret not having that opportunity again.
It will be nice to be skiing a little bit in February, that's for sure. But having said that, since I am just a few weeks from stepping down, I do want to thank this committee for its partnership. And I want to thank Director Clapper and Admiral Rogers for the privilege of being able to serve together with them in the leadership of the U.S. intelligence community. And to the men and women of the U.S. intelligence community, civilian and military, thousands of whom are deployed today around the world, advancing U.S. interests and protecting America. I do admire your integrity. I admire your service. It has been an honor to serve with you over the last many years. In the interest of time, I'll briefly note the Department of Defense's views on cyber in 3 core themes. First, the threats we must address. Second, what we are doing to address them now. And third, the difficult but urgent work we know still lies ahead. First, the threats. As you know, the Department of Defense's leadership believes we confront no fewer than 5 immediate but also distinct and evolving challenges across all operating domains. We are countering the prospect of Russian aggression and coercion, especially in Europe, something we unfortunately have had to energetically renew our focus on in the last several years. We are also managing historic change in perhaps the most consequential region for America's future, the Asia-Pacific, and watching for risks associated with China's destabilizing actions in the region. We are checking Iranian aggression and malign influence across the Middle East. We are strengthening our deterrent and defense forces in the face of North Korea's continued nuclear and missile provocations. And we are countering terrorism with the aim of accelerating the lasting defeat of ISIL and al-Qaeda. These are what many in the Department of Defense have termed the 4+1, 4 state-based challenges and an ongoing condition of battling terrorism. As our joint written statement for the record has detailed, each of these security challenges, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and global terrorist groups such as ISIL, presents a significant cyber threat dimension to the U.S. military. Cyber is an operating domain that is real, complex, dynamic, contested, and must be addressed. Second, what we are doing about it. The Department of Defense has for several years pursued a comprehensive strategy for maintaining the necessary strategic dominance in this domain. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter has pressed for DoD to change, to adapt, and to innovate, not only to meet today's challenges, but also to ensure that we effectively defend against cyber threats well into an uncertain future. We have built and continue to build the means and methods that will strengthen our relative position against each of these dimensions of the cyber threat. The government's cyber policies, reflected in presidential policy directives and executive orders, provide guidance on the absolute necessity of a whole-of-government approach critical to protecting our nation. The Department has developed, refined, and published its cyber strategy, which clearly lays out 3 key DoD cyber missions: defending DoD networks, providing cyber options for our military commanders, and when called upon by our nation's leaders, defending the nation against cyber attacks of significant consequence. As the Director and Admiral Rogers will note, since 2009, the Department has matured Cyber Command to ensure clear command responsibility and authority and growing capabilities essential to our unity of effort for cyber operations. We also continue to mature our cyber mission forces, which this fall achieved Initial Operating Capability, or IOC, status. This force is providing military capability to execute our 3 missions in cyberspace. We're building new capabilities and new tools for the cyber mission force to use. Third, what remains to be done. As much as we have done, we recognize there is much more to do. Let me mention just a couple of those most important tasks here. First, we need to continue to develop and refine our national cyber policy framework, which includes the evolution of all dimensions of our deterrence posture, the ability to deny the adversary its objectives, to impose costs, and to ensure we have a resilient infrastructure to execute a multi-domain mission. This refinement and evolution in our deterrent thinking and capability will further empower decision-making at net speed. Second, within the Department, Cyber Command has matured and is doing more to protect the nation and support global operations than ever before. And we need to continue, in fact, accelerate this maturation. Accordingly, the Secretary of Defense supports the elevation of Cyber Command to a unified combatant command and supports ending the dual-hat arrangement for the leadership of NSA and Cyber Command, and doing so through a deliberate, conditions-based approach while continuing to leverage the shared capabilities and synergies. And finally, we must redouble our efforts to deepen partnerships between government and the private sector and between the U.S. government and our allies. We must continue to seek help from American industry, the source of much of the world's greatest technology talent, in innovating to find cyber defense solutions, build resiliency into our critical infrastructure systems, and strengthen our deterrence. With our international allies and partners, we must work together to promote stability in cyberspace, universal recognition that existing international law applies in cyberspace, and the adoption of voluntary peacetime norms of responsible state behavior. Mr. Chairman, thanks. I look forward to your questions. I'll now pass the baton to Director Clapper. Thank you.
General Clapper.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee, first, thanks very much for your opening statements. Obviously, we're here today to talk about cyber threats face our nation, and I will offer some brief valedictory recommendations and a few parting observations. I certainly want to take note of and thank the members of the committee who are engaged on this issue and have spoken to it publicly. I know there is great interest in the issue of Russian interference in our electoral process based on the many classified briefings the intelligence community has already provided on this topic to the Congress. Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson and I have issued statements about it. The joint analysis report that you alluded to, publicly issued by Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, provided details on the tools and infrastructure used by the Russian intelligence services to compromise infrastructure associated with the election, as well as a range of U.S. government, political, and private sector entities, as you described. As you also noted, the President tasked the intelligence community to prepare a comprehensive report on Russian interference in our election. We plan to brief the Congress and release an unclassified version of this report to the public early next week, with due deference to the protection of highly sensitive and fragile sources and methods. But until then, we're really not prepared to discuss this beyond standing by our earlier statements. We are prepared to talk about other aspects of the Russian cyber threat. We also see cyber threats challenging public trust and confidence in information, services, and institutions. Russia has clearly assumed an even more aggressive cyber posture by increasing cyber espionage operations, leaking data stolen from these operations, and targeting critical infrastructure systems. China continues to succeed in conducting cyber espionage against the U.S. government, our allies, and U.S. companies. Intelligence community and security experts, however, have observed some reduction in cyber activity from China against U.S. companies since the bilateral September 2015 commitment to refrain from espionage for commercial gain. Iran and North Korea continue to improve their capabilities to launch disruptive or destructive cyber attacks to support their political objectives. Non-state actors, notably terrorist groups, most especially including ISIL, also continue to use the Internet to organize, recruit, spread propaganda, raise funds, collect intelligence, inspire action by disciples, and coordinate operations. So in this regard, I want to foot stomp a few points that I've made here before. Rapidly advancing commercial encryption capabilities have had profound effects on our ability to detect terrorists and their activities. We need to strengthen the partnership between government and industry and find the right balance to enable the intelligence community and law enforcement both to operate as well as to continue to respect the rights to privacy. Cyber operations can also be a means to change, manipulate, or falsify electronic data or information to compromise its integrity. Cyberspace can be an echo chamber in which information, ideas, or beliefs, true or false, get amplified or reinforced through constant repetition. All these types of cyber operations have the power to chip away at public trust and confidence in our information, services, and institutions. By way of some observations and recommendations, both the government and the private sector have done a lot to improve cybersecurity, and our collective security is better, but it's still not good enough. Our federal partners are stepping up their efforts with the private sector, but sharing of what they have remains uneven. I think the private sector needs to up its game on cybersecurity and not just wait for the government to provide perfect warning or a magic solution. We need to influence international behavior in cyberspace. This means pursuing more global diplomatic efforts to promulgate norms of behavior in peacetime and to explore setting limits on cyber operations against certain targets. When something major happens in cyberspace, our automatic default policy position should not be exclusively to counter cyber with cyber. We should consider all instruments of national power. In most cases to date, non-cyber tools have been more effective at changing our adversaries' cyber behavior. When we do choose to act, we need to model the rules we want others to follow, since our actions set precedents. We also need to be prepared for adversary retaliation, which may not be as surgical, either due to the adversary's skill or the inherent difficulty in calibrating effect and impact of cyber tools. That's why using cyber to counter cyber attacks risks unintended consequences. We currently cannot put a lot of stock, at least in my mind, in cyber deterrence. Unlike nuclear weapons, cyber capabilities are difficult to see and evaluate and are ephemeral. It was accordingly very hard to create the substance and psychology of deterrence, in my view. We also have to take some steps now to invest in the future. We need to rebuild trusted working relationships with industry and the private sector on specific issues like encryption and the roles and responsibilities for government, users, and industry. I believe we need to separate NSA and Cybercom. We should discontinue the temporary dual hat arrangement, which I helped design when I was Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence 7 years ago. This isn't purely a military issue. I don't believe it is in NSA's or the IC's long-term best interest to continue the dual hat setup. Third, we must hire, train, and retain enough cyber talent and appropriately fuse cyber as a whole of IC workforce. Clearly, cyber will be a challenge for the U.S., the intelligence community, and our national security for the foreseeable future, and we need to be prepared for that. Adversaries are pushing the envelope, since this is a tool that doesn't cost much and sometimes is hard to attribute. I certainly appreciate, as we all do, the committee's interest in this difficult and important challenge. I'll wrap up by saying, after 53 years in the intelligence business in one capacity or another, happily I've just got 15 days left. I'll miss being involved in the intelligence mission, and I'll most certainly miss the talented and dedicated patriots who are in the United States intelligence community. I'm very proud of the community of professionals I've represented here for the last 6.5 years, who don't get much public recognition and who like it that way. They've always supported me, and I'm confident they will do no less for my successor, whoever that turns out to be. So with that, let me stop and pass to Admiral Rogers.
Thank you, General. Admiral Rogers.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, good morning. And thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today on behalf of the United States Agency. I'm honored to appear besides Director Clapper and Undersecretary Lettra, and I applaud them both for their many years of public service. It's been a true honor, gentlemen. When we last met in September, I discussed the changing cyber threat environment, and today I look forward to further discussing this complex issue. Of course, some aspects of what we do must remain classified to protect our nation's security, so today I will limit my discussion to those in the public domain. We have seen over the course of the last year how this cyber threat environment is constantly evolving. We have all come to take for granted the interconnectivity that is being built into every facet of our lives. It creates opportunities and vulnerabilities. Those who would seek to harm our fellow Americans and our nation utilize the same internet, the same communications devices, and the same social media platforms that we, our families, and our friends here and around the world use. We must keep pace with such changes in order to provide policymakers and our operational commanders the intelligence and cyber capabilities they need to keep us safe. That means understanding our adversaries to the best of our ability and understanding what they mean to do and why. We're watching sophisticated adversaries involved in criminal behavior, terrorism planning, malicious cyber activities, and even outright cyber attacks. While this is a global problem, we have also recently witnessed the use of these tactics here at home. The statement for the record that we have provided jointly to this committee covers the threat picture worldwide, but I know this hearing today will inevitably focus on reports of interference in our recent elections. I echo Director Clapper in saying that we will await the findings of the just completed intelligence review ordered by the President and defer our comments on its specifics until after that review is shared with our leaders and congressional overseers. I do want to add, however, that over this last year, NSA and Cyber Command have worked extensively with our broader government partners to detect and monitor Russian cyber activity. The hacking of organizations and systems belonging to our election process is of great concern, and we'll continue to focus strongly on this activity. For NSA's part, we focus on the foreign threat actor in foreign spaces, but we share our information as readily as possible with the rest of our partners in the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, and federal law enforcement, as well as others within the U.S. government and the private sector. As you know, Russian cyber groups have a history of aggressively hacking into other countries' government, infrastructure, and even election systems. And as I've indicated, this will remain a top priority for NSA and U.S. Cyber Command. In this changing threat environment, I'd like to take this opportunity to emphasize the importance of improving cybersecurity and working related issues across public and private sectors. We continue to engage with our partners around the world on what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior in cyberspace, and we clearly are not where we want to be nor where we need to be in this regard. We continue to make investments in technologies and capabilities to improve detection of malicious cyber activities and make it more difficult for malicious cyber actors intending to do us harm. Combating cyber threats take more than technology. It takes talented, motivated people. And we are investing more than ever in the recruitment and retention of a skilled workforce that is knowledgeable, passionate, and dedicated to protecting the nation for the safety of our citizens and of our friends and allies around the world. Innovation is one of the key tenets of NSA and Cyber Command, and we need to invigorate the cyber workforce to think creatively about challenges that do not ascribe to traditional understandings of borders and boundaries. This remains a key driver and a key challenge as we look to the future. Cyber Command is well along in building our cyber mission force, deploying teams to defend the vital networks that support DoD operations, to support combatant commanders in their missions worldwide, and to bolster DoD's capacity and capabilities to defend the nation against cyber attacks of significant consequence. The organizations I lead, U.S. Cyber Command and the National Security Agency, have provided intelligence, expert advice, and tailored options to the nation's decision makers in response to recent events. Much of their activity can only be discussed in classified channels, but I must say I'm proud of what both organizations have accomplished and will accomplish, even as we acknowledge we have to do more. I look forward to your questions. And finally, on one personal note, I apologize to all of you. I have an ongoing back issue, and if I have to stand up in the course of this time period, please don't take that as a sign of disrespect in any way. I guess I'm just getting older. That's all I have for you, sir.
I know how you feel. Director, I just have to, General Clapper, I just have to mention the name Mr. Assange has popped up, and I believe that he is the one who's responsible for publishing names of individuals that work for us that put their lives in direct danger. Is that correct?
Yes, he has.
And do you think that there's any credibility we should attach to this individual, given his record of
Not in my view.
Not in your view. Admiral Rogers?
I second those comments.
Thank you. For the record, on October 7th, the Homeland Security and Office of Director of National Intelligence, their assessment was that the U.S. intelligence community is confident that the Russian government directed the recent compromise of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. Goes on to say these thefts and disclosures are intended to interfere with the U.S. election process. Quote, such activity is not new to Moscow. Russians have used similar tactics and techniques across Europe and Eurasia. Quote, based on the scope and sensitivity of these efforts, that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities. General Clapper, those are still operable and correct statements?
Yes, Chairman McCain, they are. As I indicated in my statement, we stand actually more resolutely on the strength of that statement that we made on the 7th of October.
I thank you. And so really what we're talking about is if they succeeded in changing the results of an election, which none of us believe they were, that would have to constitute an attack on the United States of America because of the effects if they had succeeded. Would you agree with that?
First, we cannot say they did not change any vote tallies or anything of that sort.
Yeah, I'm just
and
talking
we have
about,
we have no way of gauging the impact that certainly the intelligence community can't gauge the impact it had on choices the electorate made. There's no way for us to gauge that. Whether or not that constitutes an act of war, I think, is a very heavy policy call that I don't believe the intelligence community should make, but it's certainly would carry, in my view, great gravity.
Thank you. Admiral Rogers, have you seen this problem in your position getting worse or better? In other words, it's my information that their techniques have improved, their capabilities improved, the degree of success has improved. Is that your assessment?
So I have publicly said before that the Russians are a peer competitor in cyber. If you look broadly beyond the Russians to cyber writ large, the level of capability of nation states and actors around the world continues to increase. I can't think of a single significant actor out there who is either decreasing their level of investment, getting worse in their tradecraft or capability, or in any way backing away from significant investments in cyber.
And with all due respect to you, Mr. Secretary, I have not seen a policy. In other words, I don't think any of our intelligence people know what to do if there is an attack besides report it. I don't think that any of our people know if they see an attack coming, what specific action should be taken. Maybe I'm missing something, but I've asked time after time, what do you do in the case of an attack? And there's not been an answer. There's not been an answer. And I believe that unless we have specific instructions to these wonderful men and women who are doing all this work, then we're going to be bystanders and observers. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you respond to that.
Mr. Chairman, you're right that we have a lot more work to do to put the right deterrence and response framework in place on cyber. This is somewhat of a new domain of operations and, in some cases, warfare. And in my personal opinion, the next administration would be well served to focus very early on those questions of continuing to develop our overarching policy, a comprehensive approach, and a increasingly robust and refined deterrence framework.
Thank you. Finally, Director and Admiral, would it make your job easier if you didn't have to report to 7 different committees?
Chairman McCain, my hands have been slapped before when I ventured into the delicate area of congressional jurisdiction. So for
Even in the last
remaining 15 days that I'm in office, I don't think I'm going to speak to that. Afterwards, that might be different.
Well, we'll look forward to calling you back. Admiral Rogers.
Can I second the comments of the Director of National Intelligence?
But it does make it difficult, doesn't it, with the, it's not exactly stovepiping, but overlapping jurisdictions, I think makes your job a little harder, doesn't it? I mean, in all candor, Admiral.
I mean, the way I would phrase it is, I think clearly an integrated approach is a key component of our ability to move ahead here. I would say that in the government, in the private sector, there's no particular one slice where that's not applicable.
Thank you. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Clapper, you responded to the Chairman that in October you and the Director of Homeland Security concluded that the Russian government intervened in the election, and Admiral Rogers also seconded that view. That is also today the view, for the record, of the FBI and the Central Intelligence Agency, in fact, all the intelligence community. Is that correct?
Yes, the forthcoming report is done essentially by those three agencies, CIA, FBI, and NSA.
And the same conclusion with respect to the involvement of high-level Russian authorities is shared by all of these agencies?
Yes.
The chairman just noticed the legislative compartmentalization. Is that reflected also in terms of operations, in terms of, for example, Admiral Rogers, if you, through NSA or through your sources, detect something that is obviously a disruption, something that is patently wrong, you can communicate to the FBI or law enforcement, but there's no mechanism to make things happen administratively. Is that fair?
There's certainly a process, and in fact, there have been several instances that I can think of in the last 18 months where we have run through that exact same scenario. Intelligence, as it does in many other areas, other domains, will detect incoming activity of concern. We NSA, will partner with FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Cyber Command, to ensure the broader government, the Department of Defense, and FBI and its relationship with the private sector. The biggest frustration to me is speed, speed, speed. We have got to get faster. We've got to be more agile. And so for me, at least within my span of control, I'm constantly asking the team, what can we do to be faster and more agile? How do we organize ourselves? What's the construct that makes the most sense? We can't be bound by history and tradition here, so to speak. We have to be willing to look at alternatives.